The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Yesterday, we told you about the stunning live television killing of two individuals from WDBJ. And we now know that the alleged shooter, the presumed shooter, the admitted shooter, because he did post a video to Facebook from a first-person perspective showing himself shooting these individuals, Bryce Williams, has killed himself. He sent a chilling fax to ABC News, according to the network, where he said, quote, "I've been a human powder keg for a while, just waiting to go boom." The document purportedly from the same man who gunned down Alison Parker and Adam Ward yesterday started a manhunt, and it ended when troopers closed in on him, Lewis, and he turned the gun on himself. It seems to be the most frequent ending to these types of manhunt shooter type scenarios. I don't think it came as a surprise to too many people. And I guess what we can say is that it did not, the ultimate demise of this individual did not involve injury to any additional people beyond the tragic deaths of Alison Parker and Mr. Ward and the injury of that third person who was on site at the shooting.
Right. So that was a good thing. The thing that was different about this case was that whole social media aspect of this, having the killer live tweeting while evading police. And we don't really see anything like that.
This 23-page fax arrived to ABC about 2 hours after the shooting, and it came from someone referring to themselves as Bryce Williams, which was, as you may recall from yesterday's show, the on-air name of Vester Flanagan II. Bryce Williams was the name he used when he worked as a reporter for WDBJ, and we have every indication now that he was indeed a sort of disgruntled former employee of that station. Disturbing, not terrorism in the sort of traditional sense, a disgruntled former employee. And in fact, tomorrow we're going to talk, Lewis, in our sort of flashback segment about the incident involving the disgruntled former employee that shot up around the Empire State Building area in New York City, which ultimately led to New York City police killing him and injuring 9 other bystanders. So this disgruntled former employee thing, not completely uncommon, and at the same time brings back some pretty serious questions about guns in the United States. This specifically is about the idea that disgruntled former employees think to turn to guns when they want to sort of rectify the disgruntledness that they are experiencing. And that is something which is more common in the United States than in other countries at our level of development. That idea of very quickly going to the gun to try to respond to a disgruntled employment situation.
Yeah, and we have to ask ourselves, should employers have to consider this when they are considering terminating someone? Do they have to say to themselves, how do we handle this? This guy is clearly disturbed. This person has an issue. Do we fire them? What if they shoot up the place? How do we handle this?
Well, as a general thing, the reaction of the employee upon being fired is generally considered, which is often why you have multiple people sort of in the room when you're communicating the firing or layoff, and you typically have them escorted out to make sure they don't steal anything or destroy anything. But you're talking about a sort of longer timeline in terms of, fine, we get them out of the building with no incident, but what happens next? And I mean, it's a very sad reality that this is something that employers have to think of when making decisions about employees.
Agreed. Yeah, I think we would live in a much better place if that were not a factor.
Let's talk a little bit about mass shootings in the United States more generally. Yesterday was August 26th, which is the 238th day of the year. This brought, with the addition of the shooting involving Bryce Williams / Vester Flanagan in Virginia, it brought us to an average of more than one mass shooting per day. 247 mass shootings at the end of yesterday in only 238 days. Now, these numbers are compiled by the moderators of a Reddit discussion forum, which tracks gun violence in America. Their definition of a mass shooting is different than the one used by the FBI. The FBI's definition requires 3 or more people to be killed by gunfire. And we've said many times, Lewis, if you have multiple people shot, it doesn't really matter whether they ultimately die or not. That is still a mass shooting. You had multiple people shot, and thus the definition used on this discussion forum is if at least 4 people are shot, including the gunman, which makes a lot more sense to me.
Yeah, well, should it stop there? I mean, if someone walks into a mall and opens fire with an automatic rifle with the intent to kill as many people as possible, but just so happens to hit no one, is that not also a mass shooting?
That's a very good argument to be made. And that's why I think it's even more reasonable to say, listen, if 4 people, including the gunman, are shot, we should definitely be calling it a mass shooting. And again, by that definition, 247 mass shootings in the first 238 days. Now, there are some gun rights activists, for example, John Lott, who we've had on the program, say that we shouldn't count gang killings in mass shootings, and we also shouldn't count domestic disputes in mass shooting. But how many mass shootings are we going to remove from the definition of mass shooting until the numbers no longer have any meaning?
That's a good question. You tell me.
It also sort of suggests that the lives of victims are valued differently depending on the context in which they were shot. If you say, well, there was a domestic shooting where mom and mom's sister and mom's sister's husband were shot, but because it was a domestic scenario, that doesn't count as a mass shooting, which strikes me as absolutely nonsensical.
Yeah, I don't like that one. You know, I don't know why. We kind of need to consolidate here and have one definition on what a mass shooting is. I'm not sure why the FBI chose such a difficult one.
Now, what is the solution to this problem, courtesy of the National Rifle Association, the biggest gun lobby in the United States? Obvious. We need more guns. How is that logical to anybody at this point? How can anyone really get behind the idea that as a solution to our gun problem in this country, we should arm more people? And we've looked at every single element of this, Lewis. We've talked about, well, what is the likelihood of using a gun as a good guy with a gun to stop a bad guy with a gun, like at the Aurora, Colorado movie theater? Would having all sorts of guns starting to fire when you hear gunshots in a dark movie theater have led to more death or less death? Would it more efficiently have dispatched shooter James Holmes starting to fire guns in a dark movie theater? I think we know the answer to that. And then we've also looked, Lewis, at the likelihood of whether the victim of a crime is more or less likely to end up injured themselves if they have a gun when they are victimized. And it turns out that no, having a gun, whether you use it or not, having a gun when you are the victim of a crime does not reduce the likelihood that you end up injured as the victim of that crime. So we've looked at every element here, but we still have the NRA, which says, hey, if there's a lot of gun violence, we need more guns in the hands of people to protect themselves. If we see a decrease in gun violence, hey, it's because more people are getting guns and everybody should have a gun and then we wouldn't have any shootings. Either way, they argue, aside from the facts, that we just need more guns around.
Yeah, the evidence does seem to point to the fact that owning and holding and having a gun on you kind of just gives you a false sense of security. And, if that makes people happy, that's unfortunate. I certainly don't want more guns, but more shocking than the mass shooting statistics are just the number of shootings in general. Far more shocking.
Oh, once you add incidents that are one person being shot, the numbers are just disturbingly shocking, as Lewis is pointing out. No question about it. Hey, I've got some video footage that I think you're going to love. Yesterday, we told you about Univision reporter Jorge Ramos being kicked out of a press conference by Donald Trump after Ramos tried to ask a question about Trump's immigration ideas, which of course are completely not based in reality. Trump signaling to his security kicking out the Univision reporter. There's video now from behind the scenes after the reporter was kicked out, where a Trump supporter comes over and tells Jorge Ramos, who is an American citizen, mind you, to get out of my country. You're going to like this. This is audio. This is video. This should be playing 24/7 on corporate media, but it isn't. Prepare yourselves, ladies and gentlemen. I just love this clip. Take a look.
You're very rude. It's not about you.
It's not about...
Get out of my country. Get out.
This is
not
about you. I'm a U.S. citizen, too.
Well, whatever. No. Univision, no. It's not about you.
It's not about you. It's about the United States.
No, it is. It is about the United States.
I love it, Louis. Get out of my country. I'm an American citizen. Like, which country would I go to? I love it. Every single time this happens, it's just the best.
I guess the idea is to go to any other country because this is like the epitome of the I don't want to insult everyone.
No, but this is,
like
no, let me speak. I know exactly what you're getting at, Louis.
Okay.
Let me say it in a way that I think is accurate.
Okay.
This is a perfect representation of the type of xenophobia that is being catalyzed and coalesced by the Donald Trump campaign. This doesn't mean Donald Trump is personally racist. It doesn't mean every Trump supporter is racist or xenophobic, but it tells us that there is this coalescing of a certain type of anti-immigrant xenophobia, anti-Hispanic xenophobia that is getting behind Donald Trump in a serious manner.
And, I once again, I don't want to insult people, but historically, when you look at people who kind of spew this type of rhetoric, who are they? How does history look at those people? And what did that lead to? And, it's usually pretty ugly.
Well, think about the hypocrisy of the argument that this guy is making by telling an American citizen who came here from another country to get out of his country. By this same logic, any Native American has the same right to tell Donald Trump or this dude to get out of their country because, hey, at some point they came here, and why not tell them to go back to wherever it is they came from at some point in their family lineage?
That's what I would like to see, a debate between the man in this video and a Native American who says, I want you out of my country. That would be fascinating.
This type of person who callously tells Jorge Ramos to get out of his country in spite of Ramos being a U.S. citizen is the type of person, one of the types of people that makes those around the world hate the United States. It is exactly this type of nut who catalyzes that disdain for Americans. And of course, the majority of Americans are not like this guy, but this guy represents so much of what is wrong with this country that it impacts those around the world. Now, you might say, Louis, this is the United States. Why do we care what people around the world think about us? And that's a pretty unpragmatic way of looking at the realities that we don't just exist in a vacuum. In fact, Donald Trump talking about immigration proves to us that what happens in other countries does matter.
Like Barack Obama said, and like Ronald Reagan said, we are citizens of the world, right, Dave?
No question about it. So a sentiment shared by people on both sides of the political spectrum, at least anecdotally. Get out of my country. I'm an American citizen, and it doesn't really get any better than that. We'll take a break. Be back with more after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Our program depends on the funding from the David Pakman Show membership program, which basically is you. The audience decides whether the show continues to grow or not. And through audience support, we've expanded from once every other week back in 2005 all the way to a 5-day-a-week show as of last year. Today's new member of the day is Daniel Ryder. Daniel, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member, and you can join Daniel by going to davidpakman.com/membership. You can also check out a list of all the great member perks and benefits on that same page. I have a great documentary to tell you about today. It is called The Fruit Hunters. It's a documentary about exotic fruit cultivators and preservationists. This was a topic that I got into because I actually met a couple people that are fruitarians who essentially eat just fruit and nuts. And I've told in the past some of the stories about this, the pictures they post to social media of going to Whole Foods and buying a dozen pears, which is their lunch or whatever. And there's this whole subculture, Louis, of people who seek out exotic fruits, and it is absolutely fascinating. This particular film, The Fruit Hunters, also features actor Bill Pullman. He's the guy who played the president in Independence Day alongside Will Smith. And he is a fruit hunter as well. And I don't know what it is about this film, but it is one of the most compelling and titillating things I've seen in a while.
I was aware of this, and I am a fruit lover, and I love trying any fruit that is available that I haven't tried before. So I'm guessing I would probably love this. I just haven't gotten around to watching it yet.
And in the film, they talk about the fruit conventions where people go and sample different fruits, and they talk about going to very far corners of the world to try new fruits. They try durian, which apparently is a fruit that the smell is just so absolutely terrible. And I don't even know if the taste is supposed to be good, but I do know for sure, Lewis, that the smell is absolutely rancid.
Yeah, durian kind of smells like nasty feet.
Yeah.
And I've had it, but only in the form of a sugary, sweet. So not really the best representation.
So check out the documentary, The Fruit Hunters. It's on Netflix. You can check out all of my recommendations at davidpakman.com/recommendations. And if you use the links to buy or stream or purchase books or films that we recommend on that page, you will be sending a little kickback to the show, which is always appreciated. Okay, I've got to tell you, when Donald Trump does something dumb, I point it out. But when Donald Trump does something brilliant, I point it out. Now, you might be saying, well, David, you haven't pointed out that much brilliant stuff that Trump has done. That's because he hasn't really done too many brilliant things, but he did something maybe accidentally that I think was absolutely fantastic. Donald Trump has been talking for a while about how the Bible is his favorite book. By every indication, Donald Trump is not a religious man. And we've talked about how this question, what's your favorite Bible quote, seems to come up pretty often in presidential debates. And we agree, Lewis, it's an absolutely ridiculous question that should have no place whatsoever in politics.
That is true. I'll agree. However, unfortunately, it is a very important question in politics.
So that question was asked to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump answered. And he answered in a way that some are saying shows his ignorance, which is, listen, Trump is not able to name any Bible quotes because he doesn't know any Bible quotes. But I'm going to play for you what Donald Trump said and tell you why I think it is absolutely brilliant. Take a look at this.
Okay. You mentioned the Bible. You've been talking about how it's your favorite book. And you said, I think last night in Iowa, some people are surprised that you say that. I'm wondering what one or two of your most favored Bible verses are, and why.
I wouldn't want to get into it because to me that's very personal. You know, when I talk about the Bible, it's very personal. So I don't want to get into verses. I don't want to get into...
There's no verse that means a lot to you that you think about or cite?
The Bible means a lot to me, but I don't want to get into specifics.
Even to cite a verse that you like?
No, I don't want to do that.
You're an Old Testament guy or a New Testament guy?
Probably equal. I think it's just an incredible... The whole Bible is an incredible... I joke very much so. They always hold up the Art of the Deal. I say my second favorite book of all time.
All right. So Donald Trump says, that's really personal to me. This is probably a reflection of Donald Trump's pandering with the entire Bible thing. I think the truth is probably that Trump has no favorite Bible verses because he doesn't really care about the Bible. The Bible is not his favorite book. Who knows when the last time Donald Trump seriously read a Bible was. But let's put that aside for a second. Let's assume Donald Trump is being honest, that the Bible is his favorite book. Saying that it's personal to him what his favorite Bible quote is actually a really good answer. I'm an elected official here. I may well be religious personally. I may well have tons of thoughts about my favorite Bible quotes or verses, but that's personal, and it's just not part of the political discussion. I don't know if that's what Donald Trump really meant. I think more than likely he was covering up the fact that he has no idea about any Bible quotes, but I wish every elected official would say, hey, that's personal. My personal religion is my business. The Bible is my business. I'm not going to talk about that here.
You're right, but he has brought up the Bible, and he knows that it's Republican campaigning 101. You mention the Bible, you talk about your faith in God, and you memorize a couple Bible verses, which he neglected to do. So I do believe that he was lying here, but you're right. This should have no place in politics.
And you're getting at the reality, which is particularly on the Republican side, but even on the Democratic side, if when you're asked for your favorite Bible verse, you just say, I don't believe in the Bible, I don't read the Bible has no bearing whatsoever on how I would legislate, period. You're actually, that's a big risk politically to say.
Yes, that might even be a political suicide, as it's called. Even Barack Obama had to pretend to be religious, because I don't think he is, in order to win.
The Southern Poverty Law Center tracks white nationalist and white supremacist and white separatist groups very, very closely. And Donald Trump continues to catalyze the sort of white separatist, white supremacist, white nationalist vote with his war on immigrants. He recently put out this 6-page immigration plan, which basically reads like the a playbook of the anti-immigrant movement in the United States. It calls for mass deportations. It calls for this border fence. It calls for gutting the 14th Amendment. And it is really helping to coalesce the white supremacist movement around Donald Trump. A couple of examples here. White nationalist Brad Griffin pointed out on his website, Occidental Dissent, quote, "I think a comparable moment just happened in American politics with marginalized and disaffected voters. All those people long laughed at and excluded from the mainstream who were cast out beyond the wall of respectability are now in the tank for Donald Trump. The signal has gone out to join the Trump campaign and to openly organize in the mainstream under the banner of the Republican frontrunner." So there is one example. Another example, Jared Taylor, who is one of the most significant white nationalists in the white nationalist movement today, gave Trump a huge endorsement. He wrote on his website, which is called American Renaissance, "Donald Trump's new position paper on immigration makes it official. He is easily the best presidential candidate on border security and immigration," brace yourselves, "since Pat Buchanan." Lewis, that's a pretty high bar to aspire to when it comes to white nationalism, isn't it?
And Trump is right up there. It's true. He's making great progress.
I told you yesterday that David Duke, probably the most well-known white nationalist in America, former Ku Klux Klan Grand Wizard, voiced his support for Donald Trump. That we went over yesterday. And of course, at Trump's Alabama rally over the weekend, which we covered, white nationalist Olaf Childress, who edits the racist newspaper The First Freedom, was there in person handing out copies to attendees. Something struck him as making sense about going to a Trump rally and passing out white nationalist literature. And lastly, Stormfront, which is the internet's largest white supremacist website, which was founded by former Ku Klux Klan leader Don Black, has 9 different discussion threads, quite extensive, talking about Donald Trump's immigration plan, or as we call it, an anti-immigrant plan. You don't need to argue that Donald Trump is a white supremacist or that he is personally racist to have a serious conversation that acknowledges his appeal to white supremacists and white nationalists and white separatists. In fact, I would bet that Donald Trump is no white supremacist, but his calculated politics and this immigration plan are really doing a great job of uniting all of these white nationalist groups, and the Southern Poverty Law Center is all over this thing.
But is he pushing it too much? Is he going to lose other votes because of this?
It's hard to say, right? We know that the Obama is a foreign Muslim contingent of the Republican Party is not insignificant. And if you can just deal with catalyzing that group and coalescing that group, you can get 25 to 30%, as Donald Trump seems to be getting from the Republican Party primary polls. So will it ultimately be a winning strategy? Can it get him to the 40-ish% that he likely needs to win a plurality, of Republican delegates? I don't really know, but for the time being, it has him in first place.
Which is amazing. It's a great time in American history, Dave.
We'll take a break. Next, I will be joined by Howard Kaplan.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Howard Kaplan, who has a very, very interesting story to talk about with us. He's the author of the novel The Damascus Cover, which has been translated into 7 languages and recently finished shooting as a feature film. We also have your sort of more academic background, which includes having taught at the college level comparative literature. And even before that, we have this incredible story, which had you interrogated for a long period of time, arrested in the Soviet Union, 4 days of interrogation, etc., etc. So where does it make sense to start, Howard? I mean, I guess the question is, so how did you end up being interrogated in the Soviet Union?
That's as good. Thank you. It's as good a place as any to start. I had made 2 trips into Moscow and all around the Soviet Union. I've been as far as Soviet Central Asia. I had 2 goals. One was to bring Hebrew textbooks to underground Hebrew teachers, as textbooks were not available. And the second was, in the old Soviet Union, anybody who might immigrate was not allowed to bring any of their writings with them unless they were published. They were considered property of the state. So I went in twice in 2 successive years. One time I smuggled out a roll of microfilm to London, and the other time I transferred a manuscript to the Dutch embassy.
Okay, and were you working for a particular agency in any official capacity when you were bringing things in and out, or how does that work?
You know, it reminds me a lot of the Steven Spielberg film Munich. In other words, I was probably working for Israeli intelligence, but at arm's length, not in an official capacity. I was recruited while I was a student at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. They sent me to London to meet some British people, and all my contacts ran through these British people in London.
Okay, so this is fascinating to me. When you say you were recruited, right? You're where? You're at a coffee shop and someone drops a book in front of you and says, "Oh, hello."
It has to do with a girl, but in this case, it was a romantic liaison. I did my junior year abroad at the Hebrew University, and I had a very good friend from high school in Los Angeles, and she got involved with a slightly older guy who was an American, who it turned out was looking for and recruiting Americans on campus who had American passports to go into Moscow on their way home from their junior year abroad. And as I said, we were just high school friends. And she said, "Howard, come." And we trained once a week for the entire year. We met once a week as a group with this guy.
Okay, but now, so let's talk about that. When you say you were training once a week for a year, is this sort of book learning? Is it training in tradecraft? Like, what do you mean by training?
Well, a little bit. It was not book learning. It was a little bit tradecraft. For example, we were taught about what to expect if we were arrested. And in fact, I was arrested, and many of the things that I was told what happened actually did. For example, I was told I'd be threatened with 15 years imprisonment. I actually was threatened by 10 years imprisonment. I remember I was a little bit of a cocky 22-year-old, and I thought to myself, well, I feel slighted. The other people get, threatened with 15 years. Another example, here's a real simple example. I was taught that if I need to describe someone like who recruited me or who sent me, I should describe a real person. In this case, I described my father, because when you're tired and they've been at you for a few days, they'll repeat the same question. You should describe someone that you won't forget who you described.
And in this training process and in the process of doing this smuggling in and out of materials, are you being paid by anybody, or is the idea that you are doing this because you think it's the right thing to do?
I was not paid, but all my expenses were covered. And I did think it was the right thing to do. And in fact, they gave me cash. I ended up with some extra money, and I ended up giving it to my Israeli roommate, who was recently married. He didn't want to take it, but I said, look, this is money for Israel or for whatever it is. I don't want to keep extra money. You take it. But there was no cost to me whatsoever.
So you're on the second trip to the Soviet Union and you get arrested. Talk to us about how that happens. Where are you? Were you set up? Was it by chance?
No, I was lucky because I transferred a manuscript to the Dutch ambassador in Moscow. There's a KGB guard outside the embassy. With my American passport, I was able to get in, and we made up this fake story. We talked about a mutual friend. We wrote notes back and forth the whole time. And the last thing he said to me was, "Please be careful, this is not James Bond." And then he burned all the notes. I was in Kharkov, which was now Kharkiv in the Ukraine. And I think there had been very few tourists in that city. It had not been open long as a city. And I met with actually a bunch of Jewish dissidents that night. I'd met both with Democratic, overall Soviet dissidents and Jewish dissidents. They walked me back to the hotel, one guy in particular. And as we turned the corner, a whole wall of KGB agents jumped up, slammed us against the wall. They hit him. They did not hit me. And they took us to KGB headquarters.
KGB headquarters for the time being in what is now Kharkiv, but ultimately you were brought to Moscow, correct?
Right. They actually took me back to the hotel, interrogated me for 2 days in my hotel in Kharkiv. And then they flew me with 2 KGB agents on the plane with me on both sides to Moscow. 2 guys meet the flight. One speaks, and I'll tell you, perfect American English. You would think he was from Los Angeles. The other, perfect British English. And they tell me they're in-tourist guides. And they take me to a hotel by the airport, and they interrogate me another 2 days there. Let's talk about the interrogations. For a 2-day interrogation, or we'll say a total of 4 days, at some point you have to eat, right? So this is predominantly a sort of hostile situation in that you're there under the presumption of having done something bad and they're interrogating you. But talk to us about the logistics of the discussion around food. Do they say to you, hey, listen, we're going to take a break. What would you like? Or well, is food just... It actually was almost like that. My joke was I got better room service in the interrogation in Kharkov than I got in the hotel dining room. Although they did one interesting thing in Moscow. This hotel was right by the airport, and there was a little tiny hotel, and they made me pay for the room I was interrogated in, which was an added insult, even though my entire trip was paid. They walked me out of this hotel into the airport, through passport control, through customs, to the departure lounge. I guess they paid for the meal. I don't think I did. And then they walked me back to the hotel. So there seemed to be an implicit message. If you cooperate, one time we won't walk you back and we'll leave you in the departure lounge and you can go. And given the training that you had received, did you sort of know or expect that ultimately you would be allowed to go free, or did you think that your life was in danger? I was on a 14-day pre-planned tour. That's how you go to Russia. You have a visa for the exact number of days you're pre-planned to be there. And I felt they had 4 days to play with me, and that if they held me past my scheduled flight, at which point it would have been a news story that I didn't come out of Russia, I was fairly confident that I was okay for those 4 days. Although one time I remember thinking, maybe more nervous than I thought, there was a match on the interrogator's desk. I picked it up just nervously, lit a match, and it slipped out of my hands and dropped on my shirt and burned a hole through it. So I probably was a bit more nervous than I thought. But as indeed, they were interested in who sent me. That's how we played it through the training. And they did expel me in a little ceremony from the Soviet Union on my scheduled flight so they could follow me in London. And when you ultimately were released, did you immediately talk to people about the details of what had happened, or did you sort of keep it secret for some time? I think I went home, is really what I did. I was in London. I came back to Los Angeles. I didn't write about it for quite a while. I think it was a little bit of an unnerving trip. I'd been to Russia 2 years in a row, transferred 2 manuscripts, met with a lot of people. So I think I was sort of ready to be a little quiet. Let's talk a little bit about the Damascus cover, which, as I mentioned, is in 7 languages, and it has recently finished shooting as a film. When you wrote the book, was it semi-autobiographical in the sense that some of the knowledge you had obtained during this time of your life was made sort of part of the context of the book? It was, but what I did was, I didn't want to write autobiography. So what I did was I took the feelings and experience I had as a 22-year-old and started writing a novel about a man who I imagined to be 50, who was sort of burnt out, who'd been through a lot of these experiences as a spy. And I've been very fortunate. Jonathan Rhys Meyers plays him spectacularly in the film. So that's what I did. I took the gestalt of what had happened to me and I transmuted it into an older character. It gave me more freedom to do it that way. And what can we expect with regard to the film's release? I would imagine, I don't think they have an exact release date yet. John Hurt plays the head of the Israeli Secret Service. I was in Casablanca for a week earlier this year while they were shooting. I think they are looking at early 2016 to release the film. It's in post-production now.
And in the limited time we have left, when you're brought on set to sort of see what's going on, are there moments where you go up to someone and you say, listen, you're in charge here, I just wrote the book, but this is completely misrepresenting the idea I had in my mind of what this would be like? Or do you keep those thoughts to yourself?
Well, at that point, I kept things to myself. My experience was different than I expected. It turned out the scenes that were shot that were exactly from the book were sort of harder for me to watch because I kept thinking, oh, I should have written that better. The scenes that I watched that were new, that weren't in the book, were really easy for me to watch because I didn't feel any personal responsibility for them. They did show me some of the early edits of the film, and they wanted my take. And in fact, there I made some suggestions that they were very excited about. It was a fresh eyes. They've been working on editing it 12 hours a day, and they came to me and said, have a look. So that was recently.
Let me remind everybody, we're talking about the Damascus cover. Also check out by Howard Kaplan, Bullets of Palestine, which is a novel of sort of Israeli-Palestinian reconciliation. It's been praised by both Israeli and Arab press. Howard Kaplan is our guest who we've been speaking with. Howard, thank you so much for talking to us about this. Just a fascinating story.
Thank you so much for having me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
If you've been paying attention to American politics for any period of time, you know that the Republican Party is the self-proclaimed family values party, the moral majority. They're against gay marriage, they're against abortion, they're for Bibles and religion and prayer and all that, and they are the moral authority. They're against swearing on TV, they're against nudity. They've talked about the only discussions of sex in school being discussions that tell you just never have sex. And there's an interesting element that's not being discussed about Donald Trump's candidacy here, which is that he is really going the opposite direction of the sort of family values, moral majority type of candidate. His current wife, Melania Naus, now Melania Trump, posed nude for a magazine in Donald Trump's private jet. As John Ponder has written on PencitoReview.com, imagine for a moment that photos emerged of the wife of a past Republican frontrunner, Ann Romney or Cindy McCain, for example, supine on a fur rug in the altogether. Their husbands' campaigns would have been over faster than Rick Perry could say oops, but for whatever reason, this does not seem to be disturbing conservatives when it comes to Donald Trump. And let's not forget, this is not just about some nude pictures of his wife on his private plane. 14 years after impeaching President Clinton over a sex lie in civil lawsuit, the Republicans are now giving majority support to a notorious philanderer who openly carried on an affair with wife number 2, while still married to wife number 1, and may have started seeing wife number 3, the one who posed nude, while still married to wife number 2. So there is this is not an insignificant thing. Now, you and I know, Lewis, and much of our audience recognizes that the Republican Party is not really the party of the moral majority or moral authority or family values, but they've been sort of couching themselves in this way since the 1980 election cycle.
Right. We know that. And well, there's a couple ways to look at it. They actually do see themselves that way. We see ourselves that way because we are focusing on issues that actually affect people and that we think are important. And they're focusing on abortion and gay marriage, and they think that's important.
There is one positive,
that's their morality.
Though. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There is one positive that could come of this, which is maybe Donald Trump's popularity would say to Republicans, hey, maybe we should be less concerned with the sort of litmus test of a, quote, good family man, and more concerned with picking a leader that knows what they are doing. Now, as it happens to be with Donald Trump, he is not a good moral family man, nor is he someone who knows what they are doing in the potential role of president. So Trump specifically wouldn't be the right person. But the idea that we should focus more on what the issues are and their qualifications to be president rather than whether they or their wife or whoever posed nude, that's an idea I can certainly get behind.
I think that's what's happening here. Those who are supporting Trump have accepted him. He's been in the public spotlight for a long time. They know he's a character. They know he's kind of nuts. And they say, you know what? I don't care. I like what he's saying, and I'm going to vote for him.
You might remember that just recently, the cheating website Ashley Madison was hacked and millions of user profiles and user data was leaked. Ashley Madison is a website where people in monogamous relationships or in marriages, whatever, can go to have discreet affairs. Now, I've long wondered how there could be any reasonable number of women on ashleymadison.com, because the reality is that if women want to cheat, they can easily find someone to cheat with. Why would they need to troll a website, make a profile, etc.? When you hear the ads for Ashley Madison or go to their website, everything implies that there are just tons of women waiting for men to show up and wanting to cheat with them, which is really pretty absurd. And the leak has exposed the reality that many of these so-called women on Ashley Madison probably don't exist. This is really, really interesting. Annalee Newitz from Gizmodo downloaded all the data and analyzed it. And she went through 5.5 million female profiles and then also the 31.3 million men's profiles. So that data alone suggests, okay, 85% of Ashley Madison users are men, 15% of Ashley Madison users are women. But no, she looked into it even further and found out that there is a lot more to this. First of all, there's a former employee of Ashley Madison who sued the company over the terrible work conditions. And she said she was creating 1,000 fake profiles of women every 3 months. These were in particular written in Portuguese to appeal to a Brazilian audience. So we have that bit of data. But then there's even more data. One is that there's this clause in the Ashley Madison Terms of Service, which says some people are using the site purely, quote, for entertainment, and they aren't actually seeking any in-person meetings with people that you might see on the service. So that is yet another way, Lewis, in which Ashley Madison is opening the door to the idea that some of these profiles may not really be people who want to meet ... if they're real at all.
Yeah, I mean, I just assume that for sites that you have to pay for, the companies are generating fake accounts. And for sites that are free, you've got just countless spam accounts. That just seems to be the norm across the board here.
And then the cherry on top is 2 more pieces of data. One is that Annalee Newitz checked how many of the users' email addresses were at ashleymadison.com. And it turns out that there are dozens and dozens of accounts where the woman's email address was, for example, 100 at ashleymadison.com, 200 at ashleymadison.com. Ashley Madison does not verify email addresses, so it could be a real user that just decided to put in an at ashleymadison.com address, or it is another piece of data suggesting that these are fake accounts created by the company. And then lastly, Lewis, if you look at the IP addresses of the people creating accounts, remember, 85% of the leaked data was male profiles, 15% was female profiles. When you look at the IP addresses, if you look at one particular IP address, 127.0.0.1, which is your home computer within your home network, it's you essentially, right? An overwhelming percentage of those accounts are women's accounts, further suggesting that Ashley Madison has created fake female profiles. Now, is this a surprise to me at all? Absolutely not. But it again shows us that this idea that men are going to go on Ashley Madison and just find a plethora of women just waiting to cheat on their spouses or significant others with them, the entire thing is fake.
Yeah, of course, you can see it in their ad campaign that it's totally geared towards getting men on the site to pay tons of money and hopefully hook up. And I'm sure some people have been successful, but yeah, it's a total scam.
We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Take a listen to this.
Hi, David. You keep talking about why Republicans are not interested in helping kids after the children are born,
right,
in relation to abortion. It has nothing to do with the kid. The truth is, all they want to do is people like Rick Santorum, all they want to do is subjugate women by taking away the woman's right to control her own body.
Absolutely, and we've talked about that many times before. So much about Republican opposition to abortion is about men deciding what women should do with their bodies. And go back to that recent abortion hearing, that was all men talking about abortion. On the bonus show today, a small startup announces a fusion breakthrough, a glue that hardens with electricity, and the Twitter junk off. What is that? Lewis will tell us about it. davidpakman.com/membership to sign up.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.